Well, hey there, folks. Welcome to the Roundup. We are a Cowboy State Daily podcast, and we focus on interesting people in the Cowboy State. And there is not a more interesting subject in all of the Cowboy State than Yellowstone National Park. And we have the guy. We are talking to Cam Sholly, Superintendent of Yellowstone National Park, who's in his seventh year of being that guy at the head of all of the great things that are happening in America's first national park. Before we start our conversation with Cam, though, I want to make sure that you know about another fantastic podcast that's called the Business from the Basement podcast. It's put on by the Wyoming Business Alliance. So check out the Wyoming Business from the Basement podcast if you're a business person in Wyoming and you have questions, you want to connect, you want to network, you want to find out who's the movers and shakers, the Business from the Basement podcast will tell you that. But don't go there yet, because first we're going to have a chat with Cam Sholly. I have not had a chance to talk to Cam Sholly. I used to do interviews with him every once in a while when I was doing the reporting. But I tell you what, this whole, doing the news, daily news, takes me away from talking with people like you until today. Cam, hello. How have you been?
I'm good, Wendy. It's good to see you. We miss you. And your podcast is coming to an end, I understand. So I'm going to wish you the
It's
best as you move on to bigger and better things.
it's going to be a transition. It is, but it's going to be great. And I'm still going to get a chance to talk to you every once in a while, and that's going to be a really good thing. But Cam, let's talk about your favorite subject, I'm sure, which is this amazing place that's been preserved and set aside for the enjoyment of the people, Yellowstone National Park. And you have had the privilege of being the head guy, if you want to call it that, if you are the point person for everything Yellowstone. And what a privilege that has to be for you, especially for the last 7 years now.
Yeah, it's incredible. It's been 7 years. It seems like yesterday on the one hand, and it seems like I've been here for 30 years on the other. We had a terrific year this year. I'll knock on wood. We didn't have any calamities, so no floods or
Oh man.
hydrothermal explosions or shootings or anything like that. But it was really busy. It's going to be a near record year. I know we'll talk about visitation, but the team did a terrific job. We've had a lot of support and been out in the communities quite a bit, talking with folks. I think the businesses in the surrounding communities had a really good year overall. And, like I said, hard to believe it's mid-September already. The summer flew by, but everybody can be really proud of the team and everything that we did to facilitate what'll be close to 5 million visitors this year. I don't think we're going to quite get to that, but it'll probably
Mhm.
be right in that area, that 4.8 million range.
Cam, do you think, and getting straight into some of the heavy stuff, do you think that the national policies with tariffs and kind of there's some bad blood internationally, obviously now, do you think, did that make a difference with international visitors this year? Do you guys keep those metrics?
I don't have those immediately available. Our international numbers have fluctuated somewhere between 18 to 25%. I think it's going to be in that range again this year. I'll be able to confirm that later. I can tell you from being out quite a bit and talking to the team across the park, there are significant numbers of international visitors, not only here in
Great.
Yellowstone, but other parks. So I don't think that that's had a major impact at all. I wouldn't be surprised if those numbers actually went up. But once we get through the rest of the year, we'll be able to confirm that.
That is great. But like you say, visitor numbers not quite over that 5 million mark. Is that good? Is that okay? Because we seem to have been going on this freight train that's just bound and determined to break all records for years, just up and up and up. That obviously there's a tipping point at some point where it's too much versus just enough. Where are we at with that, Cam?
Well, I think the everybody's got an opinion on this, and of course, everybody's opinion is right. I, I want to remind people the park's 2.2 million acres, less than 2,000 acres are pavement, and somewhere around 97% of the people never get more than a half mile away from their car. So we have no question in certain parts of the park, certain times of the year, significant amounts of traffic congestion and a lot of people enjoying this park. What I will say is number one, we do a massive amount of resource monitoring to determine where around the park are we seeing impacts from visitors and visitor use on the resources, which protecting this place is paramount, but also providing for the enjoyment of those resources, and that can be a very difficult balance, as you and I have talked about many times. I think the reality is that we're not there yet,
Yeah.
and we see absent a couple places that we're focused on, especially the Midway Geyser Basin, visitors behaving very well, enjoying this place, taking care of the resource. We do see, a small percentage that we have to deal with, but overall, uh, the condition of, and I've said this many times, the condition of the ecosystem in Yellowstone is better now than it was in 1872 when Yellowstone became a park. And that's because of a lot of hard work by decades and decades of team members doing a really good job in managing that interface. I mean, this is the biggest visitor wildlife interface in the world. So you can go to Africa or maybe Alaska and see more wildlife, but not maybe tons of people. You can obviously go a lot of places and see a lot of people, but no wildlife. And here you have both. And, it's called the North American Serengeti for a reason. And, when you
I
start
did not
looking
know
at,
that. That's news to
yeah,
me. I've never heard that.
yeah, especially Lamar Valley. And if you look at the health, species by species, and I'm not saying that, we don't have things we need to focus on. We don't have challenges. Clearly, we do, but people should not conflate traffic jams at a grizzly bear sighting with some massive resource impact necessarily. And so I think I don't know what the number is, but I always get asked the question, when are you going to do something like Zion or I think Yosemite put something into place here recently. Every park's in a different place at a different point in time. So Zion's 150,000 acres roughly, gets about the same visitation that we do, and it has,
Wow.
I think it has 42 miles of road. And so we're 2.2 million acres with the same visitation with 400 miles of road. And I'm not in any way downplaying the fact that uh, there are people out there that feel like there's too many visitors in the park. The survey we did last year, though, showed a 98% good to excellent visitor experience rating. And so I think that's a
That's
testament
pretty
to the
high.
team. Yep, I think that's a testament to the team. I think people are coming here. It's a bucket list trip. They're getting to see what they want to see. The majority of negative comments I hear on visitation come from locals, maybe sometimes the employees who want to get from one part of the park to another and don't like the fact that someone's stopping in the middle of the road to take a picture of an elk or something like that. But the reality is that I think we're balancing that very well. It's a work in progress. I think people know we've piloted a lot of things over the last several years that I've been here, in regard to more active management of parking lots and traffic. We have a whole traffic management unit now dedicated in the West Entrance Road, which has done a terrific job of facilitating both inbound traffic in the morning, outbound traffic in the afternoon. The other thing I think that people don't realize is if you look at the visitation, say, 1992 was the first year we had 3 million people in the park in a single year. 2015 was the first year we had 4 million in a single year. We got to 4.8 in 2021. So the number is, of years between each additional million is clearly shrinking.
The bell curve is getting steeper.
Kind of. But one of the things, if you look back at, say, the 1992 statistics, is we have much more visitation now in April and May and September and October than we did back then. So we had a lot of visitors in the summer months back in the 1992. That was I think 3.1 million a year. And now as time has gone on, we're not seeing as much of a shoulder season. So a lot of that visitation now is spread out over maybe a 6 month period instead of condensed into a 3 month period. And I think that's really good for businesses. I think it does diffuse the visitation to some degree. But
And
if
that's,
people
I
if
just
people
want
are,
to say real quickly, that is an observation I have never heard, and it makes so much sense.
yeah,
And it's a really different way to look at this, and it's just not a way I've ever heard it presented.
Well, I pulled the stats the other day for something else, and so in 1992 there was 462,000 people here in the month of September, and in 2024 last year there was 852,000. So even October in 1992 there was about 159,000. In 2024, 346,000. A lot of that's very weather dependent. If we have a nice
Of
October
course.
weather-wise, it's busier, but there is definitely a much larger number of people coming on what traditionally would have been the shoulder seasons outside of Memorial Day and Labor Day. And so what that means for the team is there's more people here for a longer period of time. But if you look at the July and August statistics from those years, 24 and 1992, I mean, there are more, but like August of last year had 868,000. In 1992, it was 742,000. So there's an increase, but it's not the increase that you see in those kind of outlying months around the summer. But I think there's definitely some areas we got to focus on. Midway Geyser Basin, Norris, some of the North Rim of the Grand Canyon of the Yellowstone, some of those areas. But as I said, this is a process that I think will take some time. And I've always committed since I got here in 2018 that those are decisions that we'll make with communities, with our stakeholders, looking from multiple perspectives, what the impacts on the resources are, how much is too much. And I would say the majority of people are having a fantastic experience, number one. The number of people saying, hey, institute a reservation system or timed entry right this second is pretty minuscule, especially when you're in the gateway communities, surrounding counties and that kind of thing.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I want to go back to something that we've talked about just real briefly here is the fact that this is 7 years for you that you've been there. What are some of the major changes that you have seen, the things that you've implemented, the improvements that you've overseen? When you look back at this 7 years, what are the big things that stick out to you? You mentioned the traffic management on the West Entrance Road. What are some other things that you've seen that you're very proud of? It's like, yes, I've made a difference here for the better.
Well, my success is predicated 100% on the team and the great work that they've done and that they've carried on for many, many years and decades before I arrived here. I do think that let's just talk about the wildlife and the ecosystem in general. We've continued to really attack and address the lake trout issue and the non-native fish species. I think we had zero tributaries to Yellowstone Lake that had cutthroat spawning 10 years ago, and last year we had 48 tributaries. We've seen for the first time in I think a decade osprey nests returning to Yellowstone Lake that obviously rely on
No
cutthroat.
kidding. Oh,
Yeah.
wow.
We just did another very successful release of trumpeter swans last week. We have a wolf population that sits at about 110 animals in 8 or 9 packs around the park, very healthy, doing very well. Bison population sitting right now around 5,200. A bear population that's thriving. I think we're reseeding 2,800 white bark pine trees this week.
Really?
And we've been successful at keeping aquatic invasives like zebra, quagga mussels out of Yellowstone waters. I think our fisheries are stronger than they've ever been. And so from like I said earlier, from an ecosystem health perspective, and that doesn't my biggest concern right now with the ecosystem, honestly, is it terrestrial invasives. It's something that we're developing a strategy on right now. Cheatgrass, Canadian thistle, a lot of things like that are proliferating around the park that really do have major impacts on native species. But overall, if you look at species by species, moose are rebounding. We have a thriving elk population that's right sized now because of the predator prey balance. Things are, I think, really, really good. We're working closely with our partners in the greater Yellowstone ecosystem, be it the Forest Service, the states, the Fish and Wildlife Service, Grand Tetons, on looking at, how do we maintain proper wildlife corridors for mule deer, for elk, you name it. And so a lot of great conversations going on around what we can do together collectively to keep this ecosystem intact. And that's well beyond Yellowstone. GYE is over 20 million acres. Yellowstone's 2.2 million acres of that. So it's bigger. than Yellowstone. But so yeah, we've put $20 million into the native fish restoration effort here during my tenure. I'm proud of that. The science panel has said that right now, our cutthroat trout populations are rebounding and significantly rebounding, potentially to levels that were at the same levels prior to the lake trout infestation. So really good progress on those fronts. We're continuing to make major strides in infrastructure. Most of the infrastructure in this park was built, some late 1800s to middle of last century.
Oh my, that's
Employee,
got to be a project.
yeah, and so we treated 300 million gallons of drinking water last year for visitors. You can't screw that up, right? I mean, we need to pay attention to that. Most of the wastewater systems across the park were built in the 60s, 70s, and 80s when visitation was a couple million. Thanks to the Great American Outdoors Act and other fund sources, support out of Washington, we'll be investing $250 million into upgrading those systems so that, we're not obviously putting people's lives in danger with bad drinking water and things like that, but that
That's good to know. Thank
we've
you.
got the systems in place that are going to sustain this park for many, many years to come. We're finishing $500 million of infrastructure improvements, mostly roads and bridges. Yellowstone River Bridge is in year 3 or 4. We're going to put traffic on that here next month. Lewis River Bridge just finished in July. Got about $100 million in new employee housing last 6 years. And we have somewhere around $1 billion of projects, including long-term flood recovery projects that we're moving forward. So, you can take your pick, but I think for me, it's a broad spectrum. We can talk about visitor experience and partnerships more, but of different things that either we've continued or the priorities that we set back in 2018 we're executing on at very high levels.
My goodness. And I just can't even imagine how you wrap your brain around all of that every day because you have to have your fingers on the pulse of all of that every day. Let's talk quickly about that flood from a couple of years ago. Was it 2022 that the flood occurred? So
Yeah.
2022, the big flood happened and it changed parts of Yellowstone forever. I had one of my colleagues, David Madison, asked about he had a question. He said, "Hey, could you ask Cam about if whether or not the Boiling River, Gardner River, at the confluence there will we ever be able to soak there again?" And you said, "Nope, it's gone."
Yeah, I mean, it's probably the question that I've had the most since the flood is when is Boiling River going to reopen? So, it's open to the public. People can go down there and look for themselves. But because of the flood, the river actually shifted over to the other side from where it used to be. So it was kind of, if you're floating down the river, it used to kind of come into the left there. It had a nice pool, and the hot water would come into the pool. People could sit there. There's a little rock wall that had been built over the years. The river now is all the way over to the right. And so the hot water still comes down, but it diffuses across, an area that is not necessarily conducive for soaking. And so, I've been asked, can we try to rebuild something and all that? Frankly, it's probably pretty low on the priority list considering everything else we have going. But we are excited about, we'll be launching an environmental assessment in November for the permanent road options from here in Mammoth down to Gardner. Most people know that the road through the canyon was washed out in multiple locations. We rebuilt the old Gardner Road in just under 4 months with the help of Federal Highways and some great
What
contractors.
an amazing, amazing accomplishment. Holy cow.
Yeah, great team effort. Restored access to North Entrance, which is now the second busiest entrance in the park next to West. And that road has been fantastic for the last 3 years. People need to keep in mind that it was not built to modern day safety standard. I mean, it's safe, but it's not going to last. So we need to figure out what the permanent long-term option is going to be. So we'll be releasing 3 alternatives for the public to look at and we'll take comments on those. One would be rebuilding through the canyon. One will be upgrading the old Gardner Road to modern day standards. Problem with that one is it's probably 3 to 5 years of night closures and 30-minute traffic delays on it. That ground is shifting significantly. There's a big glacial shift that is coming in from the west, and so we've got to, whatever we do, engineer around that shift. And then the third alternative is actually kind of a hybrid. Stays out of the canyon. It's down below the old Gardner Road, and we'll look forward to sharing kind of what we found over the last couple of years. We've done a lot of geotechnical surveys, a lot of different preliminary designs for people to look at. And, we look to kick that off, make a decision this year, maybe early next year, and kick that off in 27.
Can I just make an observation here? As the superintendent of Yellowstone National Park, you have to be an expert in a lot of things. I'm hearing you toss around terms geotechnical and terrestrial invasives, and I'm like, my goodness, you have to have such a grasp on all of these various aspects of course, the national park, from the biology to the geology to all of this. Do you find yourself just every day learning something new?
Well, first of all, just once again, the reason I know as much as I know is because of the team. And there's a lot of people that know a lot more about all of these different topics individually, and that's their areas of expertise. And, depending on what the focus is at a particular moment, I need to do a mind meld with them and deep dive their brain a little bit to get my own knowledge up to speed. And there's a lot of decisions that need to be made in this park that have to be made carefully, but you know, um, not overly expeditiously. But we also want to make progress, and so taking the best information that we have from our experts, taking different lenses that other people are looking through versus, it could be the business community, it could be you name it, and coming up with the right decision that's in the best interest of the park and our partners for the long term is really kind of what all of these things are about. And so that road's a good example. It's obviously a lifeline into Gardner. We saw what happened in 22 with Cook City and Silvergate, and Gardner cut off completely for the summer. I think last year's numbers, billion and a half spent by visitors to Grand Teton and Yellowstone and communities within 50 miles of the parks. So from an economic vibrancy standpoint, obviously what we're doing here now and into the future is really, really important. Once again, not just from a business or economics perspective, but from the standpoint, if you don't have good infrastructure, remember the numbers I gave you earlier on how many visitors are in such a small percentage of the park. We spend probably 90% of our budget in that small percentage, by the way, whether it's in public safety or structure fire, maintenance, cleaning bathrooms, whatever the case might be. It's important that the infrastructure is in as good a condition as possible, and that the decisions that we're making are going to withstand the test of time and allow for continued visitation well into the future. And some of the things we've been working on federal highways in both of the north corridors has really been looking at resiliency. And if we had another flood, what are the most vulnerable sections of the roads? So if we have another flood event, I know it's a 1 in 500 year flood event, but it could happen again next year. Which areas of roads would we lose, and how can we take the actions necessary to prevent that from happening and do that proactively? So I got a lot of questions after the floods. Why didn't we do this and that in the different road corridors preventatively? I think it's a fair question. There's a lot going on. We hadn't seen a flood of that magnitude in history. But from a lesson learned perspective, we are taking that very seriously. And we've done, I think, a really good job of identifying those areas that we really need to focus on and make sure something like that doesn't happen again.
My goodness, absolutely. Let's go back to all of the ologies that you have mentioned when it comes to the things that you oversee in the park and the wonderful things that have been happening. And you mentioned the bear numbers. Bear numbers are very, very healthy. There's obviously a lot of talk, once again, that seems like it comes around every few years, delist the grizzly bears. What are your thoughts on that from the perspective of the national park, from the perspective of you live with the bears? I mean,
Yeah.
that you're in the heart of grizzly bear country there. What are you seeing, and what is your take on that?
So let me just kind of back up to the Endangered Species Act. I think that the ESA is arguably one of the most important pieces of conservation legislation this country's ever seen. It's been hugely successful at recovering species. Um, for everyone that says that the species should not be delisted, all right, if you like the ESA and you want the ESA to stick around, then when recovery thresholds are set and met within the ESA, then the delisting needs to occur. And if you go and ask how many species were put on the list versus how many are taken off, even when recovery thresholds have been met, there's a pretty big disparity there. And so I think the work that's gone into ensuring that Idaho, Montana, Wyoming, with Fish and Wildlife Service, with other partners, have worked on from a conservation strategy standpoint, and then looking at the numbers and the recovery thresholds, and looking at other various factors, genetics, connectivity, some things like that, they need to be delisted. They need to be taken off the list. And it needs to be celebrated as a conservation success story. And what for those out there that are going to be yelling at their computer when they watch this or banging their steering wheel when they're driving and listening to this, think about what the ESA stands for. Think about the reason back in 1976 the grizzlies were put on the ESA. Think about what the recovery thresholds were for delisting. Ask yourself, have we met those recovery thresholds? The answer is yes. And therefore, it should trigger the delisting. And if you don't ever take species off that you put on, no one's going to want to use the ESA in the future. And so that's my viewpoints on that. I know that's not shared by some. People are pretty vocal about this topic, but it is a lot of work has gone into recovering the grizzly, and we need to move on.
Brady was so focused on 399 and of course that she was primarily Grand Teton, but that really does bring those grizzly bears and those animals to the forefront, and people are passionate about that. They've been passionate about wolves, but the wolves you mentioned earlier that because the predator prey balance, you were talking about elk numbers at that time, because the predator prey balance is working. Everybody is at a healthy population. And I think from your standpoint and the standpoint of everybody there, that's the whole goal, right?
I think speaking for Yellowstone National Park, the wolf population is healthy. I mean, obviously, people know in 2021, there was back and forth on the quotas right outside the park. We negotiated that, worked with the state of Montana. Those quotas are in place. They do provide additional protection for the small number of wolves that leave the park for short amounts of time. But generally speaking, wolves are another, I think, amazing success story. That reintroduction happened, 30 years ago. And if you look at the changes to the ecosystem, the positive changes because of wolves, and obviously wolves need to be managed, and they are being managed. We don't want wolves out killing livestock. Wolves that kill livestock should be killed themselves. I've said that many times in many forums. But they do play, a very essential role in the predator-prey ecosystem balance. And, this isn't the greatest analogy, but from a standpoint of visitation and economics, if you're going to go to see a safari in Africa and you weren't going to see any lions or you weren't going to see any predators over there, and all you were going to see is gazelles and water buffalo running around, how would that shift your experience?
Why even
And,
go? Why even go,
well,
right?
I think there's some pretty incredible, you know, parts about coming to Yellowstone National Park and being able to see everything that you see here on the entire spectrum, including wolves, including grizzlies, black bears, you name it, mountain lions. And I think that's one of the things that makes this place very special. At the same time, you have, I say this to people also that don't necessarily agree with me. People that want to go wildlife levels to go back to where they were in the 1700s or 1800s. We have a completely different societal structure now that would probably inhibit that from happening. Is it fun to think about? Yeah. But as these species and these interfaces occur in the greater Yellowstone ecosystem and beyond in other places, there's got to be a balance in management, and there's different viewpoints on that and different competing interests, and those things need to be taken into consideration, and we need to find the balance. And I think that's the critical part.
Speaking of those interactions, there haven't been a lot of bad behavior by the human beings that have been in the park. We've not been hearing a whole lot this year about people making really stupid decisions. There's been a few.
Yeah, I think there's been a couple bison gorings. Um, I think we had somebody feeding a bear. Um, but yeah, I mean, overall, it's been, we haven't had any really like dumb things, like people putting bison calves in the back of their truck or things like that. So I always go back to some of these incidents get publicized, especially with social media. I think if you look at, there's a couple of social media sites that, like in tour-ons of Yellowstone, and they always have different clips of people.
Invasion of the
Invasion of the
idiots.
idiots
Yeah,
that people aren't doing the smartest things. But when you look at overall the number of those versus almost 5 million visitors per year, it's a very, very small percentage overall, considering how much wildlife there is and how many visitors there are. I think the team's doing a really good job of. And we were just talking about this the other day of working together to manage wildlife jams effectively. We've got a whole team out here in Mammoth managing this elk rut that's gotten bigger and bigger every fall. And still people out there probably not making the best decisions, but like I said, we haven't had as many really strange ones this year as we have in some of the past years.
that is a big plus from that case. I hope we haven't jinxed anything here by talking
Yeah,
about it, but
yeah, we're gonna have
but
a flood tomorrow.
yeah, let's not do that. So we'll toss that out into the universe there. I have to say, you've talked about how the majority of the infrastructure, obviously the majority of the money is spent on this, what, 2.2% of the entire park, which is just, off the highways, really. One of the reasons I don't go off the highways is simply because I'm scared of bears. I don't
Hmm.
want to range one in the backcountry. But I'm willing to bet that you and your employees and the other people that backcountry has to be a special place for all of you. Do you get out into the backcountry often, Cam?
I get out as much as I can. I mean, I started here after I got out of the military in 1990, 91 in a place called Thoroughfare, which is in the southeast corner of the park. And that is the most remote area in the lower 48, the furthest from a road anyway. And, I've been back 5 times as superintendent. I try to get out as much as possible. It's very interesting seeing visitors in the backcountry. The further back you go, the less you see. Having lived down there in the summers of 1991, I can tell you there are no more people down there now than there were back then. I think that's kind of cool. If you look at our backcountry numbers, uh, the numbers are actually down over the last several decades as far as backcountry use goes. So, I think what you said is part of it. I mean, you kind of need to know what you're doing. You need to be prepared. I went from here in 91 to a backcountry ranger as a backcountry ranger in Yosemite, where it's in the Sierras and there are no grizzlies, and it's completely different walking around the backcountry there versus here. I mean, I always say you can't beat the grandeur of Yosemite and you can't beat the wildness of Yellowstone. And I think that you know some people can relate to this. There's just no substitute for getting out with your own thoughts, no connectivity, and being in the backcountry deep where it's wild. You got to pay attention. You got to know what you're doing, and you get to see things that most people don't get to see. And it's a pretty special part of America's, especially Western national parks.
Absolutely. Where is your favorite place, Cam? If you were to say there's one spot in Yellowstone that's very special, where's your favorite point?
Thoroughfare. Thoroughfare
Without
is
a doubt.
one of my favorite. Yeah, that in the south, on the south central part of the boundary is a place called Fox Creek, which is the headwaters of the Snake River. And that whole area down there, to me, I don't know if it's because I started there, in my first couple seasons with the Park Service back in the early 90s, or it's got a sentimental value to me, but it's also just a incredible landscape. And like I said, it's just so wild down there, and it's completely the same as it was, 35 years ago. And I think that's pretty special.
So then, if that's your favorite place, what's the best part of your job overall? When you get up in the morning and you say, "Hey, I get to do this today." What's the best part?
Well, you said this is the biggest privilege, and I agree with that. It's also on some days the biggest pain, depending on what issues are on the desk here. I think one of my favorite parts, like last Monday, I cleared my schedule and went out and met with 50 or 60 employees at almost every location in the park. I just went to Norris, went to Canyon, went to Lake, went to Grant, went to South Entrance, went to Old Faithful, went to Madison, and interfacing with the team out there and seeing visitors enjoy this place and seeing the team do such a good job of ensuring that happens is a pretty nice part of the job. I think like I said, everybody's got an opinion and everybody's opinion's right. I mean, people care passionately about what they believe in, and even whether I agree with it or not. And there are, a lot of people out there that have ideas around how we should be managing or what we should be doing. And, we try to listen to that as much as possible and make the right decisions that strike that balance that I talked about earlier. But my biggest enjoyment here is this team. This team rips it, and I've moved a lot. I've been in a lot of assignments in this agency here for 7 years now, and I just the team, just the complexities of this park and what they deal with and what they manage. I mean, the American taxpayer should be very proud of what they're getting out of the Yellowstone team and teams in other national parks. They're doing a fantastic job.
Before we kind of wrap this up, I want to talk about something real quickly that you and I talked about before we started the recording here, which is that there's been a lot of concern and you got a lot of questions at the beginning of this year about how the new administration was going to, and all of the uncertainty at the beginning of the year about how that was going to affect your staffing. But your staffing is in great shape. Let's celebrate that. Tell us about that.
Well, I think, any organization, and just take out administration changes and things like that for a second. It obviously has people retire and ebbs and flows of staffing and things like that. What I was telling you about was, I'd done some interviews in the spring about, I'm just looking at purely at our payroll numbers, and our numbers are at or higher going into this year, staffing wise, than they have been the last five. And, I think the proofs in how the team performed and the successes that we've had, and I predicted we're going to have a great summer, and we have. It doesn't mean there's not gaps. Everybody knows there's things at any point in time that, like the head of our wastewater system manager left, and he's taking a job outside of government. We're going to be able to fill that job. In fact, we're working on it right away. There are law enforcement, firefighters, a whole plethora of. I mean, the government's under a hiring freeze right now to a degree. The administration has made a decision to reduce government spending, and our job is to execute that and still continue to conduct our mission. And that's exactly what's happening here. I've had very good conversations, many, many conversations with Washington around different types of needs that we have, things that we need to focus on, and those needs have been addressed and are being listened to. And so, how do we? I get asked the question, how many people took the early retirement deferred resignation program? I think we had about 20. I think 9 of them are going to retire anyway this year. 3 or 4 of them, I wasn't that sad to see go anyway. And
Okay.
we've been plugging different gaps as we go along, and I think there's some things that we're doing differently here that are not bad. They're good, and I'm not speaking for anybody but Yellowstone right now. We're in good shape. We've got 1.1 billion in projects queued right now that are funded that we're moving forward on. Our seasonal levels, the secretary authorized full seasonal hiring. I get it. Some parks were apparently not able to hire everyone for various reasons, but we have been, and it wasn't because they weren't allowed to. I mean, sometimes we've had you know periods of time over the years where we try to recruit for a certain position and you just don't get enough applicants, or you don't get good applicants, or whatever the case is. So there's an ebb and flow there, but I mean, I got a spreadsheet with the people that are on the payroll right now as of pay period 16 in July. And those numbers are right at or above where they've been at different points in time in that same July pay period over the last 10 years. And so when I did some of those interviews in the spring, people were like, oh, that can't be true. He's, whatever the case is. I'm like, I'll provide you the payroll numbers. And so, anybody that wants to FOIA them, go ahead and do it, because they are who we're paying, who are on the books at that particular snapshot in time. And we had a great summer because of a great staff and the right staffing levels.
That is absolutely fantastic. Cam, I just want to wrap up our really awesome conversation. I've learned so much, and I hope that our listeners have as well. But tell me what you are looking forward to going forward in this next year, into your eighth year of being the superintendent of America's first national park. What are some of the things that are exciting you about this next year?
Well, we're going to maintain the path that we are on the different wildlife species and ecosystem management. We're going to get aggressive, like I said earlier, on a more targeted strategy on invasive species from the standpoint of, especially up here on the northern range. That's something we need to invest more money into and really get more on top of. And so I'm interested in that. We had a $40 million anonymous donation last year for new housing, and our first new housing units from that donation went in at Grant Village last week.
Oh,
And
my
so
word.
we'll be putting in new housing throughout the park because of that very generous donation over the next 3 to 4 years. I'm excited about that. I'm excited about, you know, um, the infrastructure things, and some of it's not super glamorous, like the water and wastewater treatment facilities, but those are things that had been neglected for a long time that are being addressed now. It's super important. We've got two of the largest historic preservation projects going in the country right now, down at Old Faithful and here in Fort Yellowstone, as far as redoing structures from the late 1800s, early 1900s. And I think that's positive. We've got, the whole long-term flood recovery. I touched on the North Entrance Road. We've got a lot of work planned for the Northeast Entrance Road as we move forward. And then we've got, I think 4 or 5 other, like for instance, bridge replacements. We've got 62 bridges in the park. I think 11 of them are in like a couple of years from condemned. And so
Oh, my.
no
Yeah.
better example of that than the 7 Mile Bridge on the West Entrance Road. The West Entrance Road from West Yellowstone takes about 48% of the visitation. And that bridge developed a hole in it last year where you could actually look through it and see down to the river. And that's not a good thing for a bridge that's
No.
carrying that much traffic. And so some of these people are like, wow, you sure are focused on bridges and things like that. I'm like, yeah, if that bridge fails, what do you think happens to West Yellowstone? Or if a bridge, you name it, and one of the corridors fails. And so we've got a lot of work to do on some of that type of infrastructure. I feel really good with the planning that we have, the support and funding that we have. I think there's a great field hearing last week or your week before down in Grand Tetons on kind of the Great American Outdoors Act 2.0. And so I think here we've done the full spectrum from housing to transportation to utility upgrades, invested a significant amount of money that's going to pay dividends into the future. And no matter how much longer I'm here, I think the momentum that we have is going to carry forward for my successor. And I'm not saying I'm leaving anytime exactly soon, but
Thank
at
you.
some
Yeah,
point,
thanks
at
for
some point, I,
clarifying that.
at
Yes.
some point, I will move on, and I feel like the park will be in very capable hands with a good plan for the future.
Cam, this has been a fantastic conversation. Thank you so much for taking time out of your huge responsibilities and sharing your thoughts with Cowboy State Daily's listeners and viewers here. Congratulations on a very successful year. Thank you for all of the heart and all of the care that you put into your job. And we're just grateful to have you in that place in this very special part of Wyoming. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Wendy, and thanks for all you've done over the years. I know you're going to still be involved in different things with Cowboy State Daily, but you've been terrific to work with, and we all appreciate you and your reporting. And good luck to you.
Thank you very, very much. And folks, thank you so much for being a part of this conversation today with Cam Sholly, Superintendent of Yellowstone National Park. We have so many other people that we have had, that I've had the privilege of having conversations with over the last couple of years. Please go back into our archives and revisit some of those conversations, but also thank you for being a part of what we do here at Cowboy State Daily. It's your heart that makes these conversations possible because we're all Wyoming and we're amazing people here in this state. Thanks for tuning in. Thank you, Cam. Have a great week.